everybody. Thanks for coming to this. It's going to be an interesting little bit of information for everybody. Final report from Herrera. We've got our awesome Fresh Waterway board up here at the front, minus at least one guy in the back that won't come up here. But anyway, we'll have a question and answer period. So Becky's going to run this part of it. So we'll let her start this up, and we'll get the show on the road.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for coming out tonight for this town hall. We're going to learn more tonight about our Fresh Waterways Algae Management Plan and also our Stormwater Rate Study. We've been working with Herrera for about 18 months with City and Community of Ocean Shores to better understand the needs of our fresh waterways, specifically with the algae management program that is desperately needed. Their subconsultant, FCS, has been working with Herrera on the updated Stormwater Rate Study, which is ready and available and will go to council in the near future. That rate study is one mechanism that we can use to fund our waterways if council chooses to do so. Tonight's meeting is not to discuss our aquatic management plan for vegetation. The aquatic vegetation management plan was done about 3 years ago by Aquatechnics. That is available on the city's website under the Fresh Waterways link. And sitting here with me tonight, as the mayor said, is the Fresh Waterways Advisory Board, as well as Tim Hiles, our grant writer and assistant project manager. And with all of that said, I will let Katie get going with Herrera. Just a second, Katie, we're not able to hear you yet. Go ahead and try again, Katie. Nope, not yet. Just to fill in a little bit of the time, the Fresh Waterways Advisory Board meetings are the first Monday of every month at 2 o'clock. If you're interested in attending, they are open to the public at the library. Clark, do you want to see if we can hear you? We won't put you on the spot for the whole meeting, but we're just checking. Okay, nope. Thank you.
I'm happy to keep to just gesticulating. Wow.
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, can you hear me?
All right, can you hear me too?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great.
All right, wonderful. Well, I'll try that again. Thanks so much. I'm Katie Rodriguez. I am a scientist at Herrera Environmental Consultants out of the Portland office. And I'm just really thrilled to be here with you all again this evening. Unfortunately, I'm not there in person, but it won't be the last time that I'm out in Ocean Shores. I'll also let you know that it looks like the Ocean Shores room screen that's being shared is the Zoom meeting instead of the room. I'm not sure if that was on purpose. But I can also go ahead and start sharing our slide deck. Maybe that'll change things. But again, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for joining us all tonight. And with that, I'm excited to present to you the culmination of our work out in Ocean Shores and with Becky and the City of Oceans. And let's see, let me know when you see the presentation show up. Um, let's see. I haven't used Zoom in a while, so forgive me for the technical difficulties. Is there a share button that I'm looking for? I see
Should be at the
record,
bottom of your screen.
raise hand. Ah, there it is. Thank you so much. There. How's that look?
It's great. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. It looks like you're seeing me. All right. So again, I'm Katie Rodriguez, and I'm joined here by my coworker Clark. I'll be doing the majority of the speaking today, and I'm also joined tonight by John, who is from FCS. I don't know if you want to give a quick hi and hello, John.
Hello. Yeah, I'll be talking more in a minute about the financial analysis that we did. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much. And with that, we'll jump right in. For tonight's agenda, just as a quick overview of what we'll be hearing about, and as a reminder for what Becky mentioned, I'll be going over a little bit more about the project, what we've done so far past year and a half. I'll be providing a summary of the Freshwaterways Algae Management Plan that Herrera produced, followed by a period of questions. And then lastly, we'll hear from John from FCS about the utility rate study, followed again by another break for questions. As an overview of this project, our entire journey together, what have we been up to? Well, I want to take us all the way back to July of 2024. When we gather in person for the first time to talk about the project and the water quality monitor plan. We were able to complete that monitoring plan and perform all of the monitoring we laid out to do for the fresh waterways and the watershed. And this really set us up well for understanding what the needs were throughout the fresh waterways and what kind of management scenarios we could be looking at. The last time we met was in February of 2025, early this year, where we talked about the results of that monitoring component and about some potential management actions. And we heard from you all about which ones seemed interesting, some early comments on our thoughts for the management plans. Also much if you were in attendance there. And since then, we've been working on developing this waterways management plan together, working with the city very closely. Of course, all the while, FCS has also been working on the stormwater utility rate study, given the plan that we out. And here we are today presenting the final plan to you. It's published on the city's site, so go ahead and check it out if you haven't already. And before I get into the nitty-gritty details of the plan, I just want to take a few minutes to reflect on and appreciate the beauty of ocean shores and the fresh waterways as we experienced them last year. Unfortunately, I can't really see the crowd right now, so I know this would go off a lot better if I was there in person. But for you all, oh, there you all are. Hi. This would, just to bring us together a little bit, if you can go ahead and raise your hand if you're living on by Lake Menard, just to give a show of hands to everyone else. I see a couple of hands. Wonderful. And how about anyone along any of those bell canals? All right, a few hands. The bell canals. Wonderful. Thank you for joining. How about the Grand Canal in all of its glory? Excellent. Thank you for. And Fishhook Canal. I think there's another name that it goes by, Crossover Canal. Is anyone from nearby that one? I'm not sure I see any hands there, but if there are, thank you so much for joining. There's a sense of Duck Lake, but how about from the very northernmost basin or area, the north end of Ocean Shores? Anyone joining from up there? How about anywhere from along the rest of Duck Lake by hands? Okay, several of you. Thank you. And then finally here I have Bass Canal. Anyone from around Bass Canal? Excellent. A few of you. Wonderful. Thank you all so much for joining and participating with me in this great exercise. And so this just goes to show how beautiful and really unique all of these freshwater ways are. And, you know, we appreciate all of the wildlife. That was something that we've heard several times from all of you, that just a vast majority of wildlife, all of the recreation that these freshwater ways offer is really, really a treasure, and what brings us all together for today. And it provide the fresh waterways, no matter where you live, provides all of these great amenities. Unfortunately, sometimes they can also look like this during the summertime. As Delaware, it can turn into this really vivid green color like we're seeing here from Duck Lake or over in Fishhook Canal. And this is all due to toxic or harmful algae, which I'll also call cyanobacteria for the purposes of presentation. Again, I'm referring to cyanobacteria. Toxic harmful algae is all sort of the same thing here. Excuse me. And just as another reminder, today we're here focusing on the harmful algae within the freshwater way, not the aquatic plants. And so with this toxic algae, just as a reminder, why do we care about all of that? And why are we here today to try to prevent it? Well, toxic algae can cause illnesses, irritations, not just in humans, but also in pets and wildlife. Because of all of that, it can reduce radiation. It can also cause some really terrible smelling odors and just not be pleasant to look at. It will reduce water quality and habitat quality for wildlife. So nobody wants that, right? So we've been working on a few solutions with the City of Ocean Shores and our partners, FCS. But first, before we get to the nitty-gritty of the management plan itself, I wanted to take us back and remind us water quality results that we found back in February, just as a refresher, because this really helped lay out what management options were going to be effective in each of these waterways, each of these lakes and canals. So in 2024, we were out several times. I'm sure I got to with many of you, along the fresh waterways or at one of our public meetings. While we were out there, we did a lot of monitoring in a lot of the fresh waterways and in the wild as well. Really trying to replicate a very comprehensive study that was in the 1990s by KCM. And largely what we found in 2024 was that the fresh waterways as a whole are very eutrophic or hypereutrophic. And what this means, this is a measure of trophic state, which is essentially a measure of water quality or productivity, and generally used as a measure of health in the systems, where eutrophic and hypereutrophic are at the really high end of that productivity scale. And so we've got some really, really productive waterways here. And some key conditions related to this is that the waters are pretty warm, especially at the surface. They tend to have low oxygen near the bottoms, near the sediment. Also frequently low water clarity, especially later in the summer and in the fall. Lots of cyanobacteria or that toxic algae. And in 2024, we saw higher amount Duck Lake, Lake Menard, Fishhook or Crossover Canal, and the south end of the Grand Canal. But I'll note too that this varies from year to year, and we'd like to keep an eye on that, which I'll talk about later. Because in the 1990s, Bass Canal was actually one of those canals, excuse me, that did some of the worst water quality. So this can change. But with lots of bacteria, we'll also see cyanotoxins coming up, right? And so this is what causes illness or the irritation is contact with the cyanotoxins that these harmful algae are producing. And in 2024, we sampled and found at least exceedance of state guidelines for microcystin, one of those toxins. And overall, this low water clarity and lots of cyanobacteria is primarily caused by high phosphorus, which is the nutrient allowing growth in plants. And what I mean by high phosphorus is, I have highlighted in red those numbers. These are really high levels of phosphorus, even for a eutrophic system. And I do also want to note that conditions in the fresh waterways and in the watershed have actually improved since 1994, which is great. Everybody take a second to celebrate. As we've compared them against the study results. And the improvements are largely due to a lot of investments by the city in improving sewer, providing sewer connections and by connecting to the sewer and providing stormwater infrastructure improvements. So, really great job, providing those improvements. But despite those improvements, waterways are still very productive and nutrient rich throughout all of the lakes. And despite the amount of algae and the conditions vary between each of the canals, the canals are very unique. One common theme is this very productive and nutrient rich system, and that's common throughout all of the lakes and waterways. So what are the sources for us? I just hit hard really on the amount of phosphorus that are in these systems. Why is there so much coming in here? Well, we can look towards some of the typical sources of phosphorus we know about for fresh waterways, which tend to include internal sources, so those that are already in the water bodies. This can the sediment, where phosphorus is released under low dissolved oxygen conditions. From decaying aquatic plants, and it can come in from waterfowl that are inhabiting the lakes. And we can also look at external sources of phosphorus, and this can include things like water coming in from streams and creeks, and it can come in from stormwater runoff as well. We monitor the watershed in 2024 and early 2025. We found that higher phosphorus tended to come from the Oyahut Creek, Clover Creek, basins and Pacific Boulevard drain from the north and west of the canals generally. And then the other external source we look at is groundwater. And I have that underlined because back in the 1990s, groundwater was found to comprise over 50% of the load going to the fresh waterways. So this is, really driving all of most of the phosphorus waterways, most of those nutrients that then fuel the algae blooms. And this is even higher than coming in from surface waters combined. So this is a really important source of phosphorus. And given our 2024 monitoring, we believe that these loading estimates are still accurate today. So briefly, where did all of this phosphorus come from in the groundwater? Why is there so much coming in? And again, based on the available keys, we think that this is coming in from ancient buried peatlands beneath the city of Ocean Shores. So this is probably what Ocean Shores looked like thousands and thousands of years ago. Over time, these peatlands and marshes got buried, and these are an important natural source of phosphorus that just happened to be beneath the city. And being on the coast with such permeable soils, what we find is that the groundwater is very connected to the surface waters throughout ocean shores. So what we have is a unique combination of these ancient buried peatlands, which are naturally leaching phosphorus and nutrients into the groundwaters beneath ocean shores. And then those groundwaters are then connected to the surface waters. So really allowing, it's a unique pathway for all of that phosphorus to be making its way back up to the surface. Well, what do we do about it? We have all these blooms, we have all this phosphorus. What can we do? Will we be doing? So that's what we're here today for, is to develop a freshwater ways algae management plan. Again, that's published now, and I'll head now and talk about the main components of that plan and our primary recommendations, given all of the monitoring that we've done and all of our work with the city and talking with you all. The first component is looking at the fresh waterways. There is a lot of water here. It is difficult to keep an eye on how much water is, excuse me. It's hard to keep an eye on so many waterways, all these individual canals, all of these really unique and specific areas. It's just a large undertaking. So to help make management more manageable, what we decided to do is institute what we're calling management units, where we're grouping together some of these canals and lake systems based on unique hydrology and shared water quality. So we have specified 9 individual management units. And this map may seem familiar if you were at our February meeting where we sort of unveiled this idea. And, essentially each of these units represents one common water body, common water quality, and hydrology. And so, like I said, this allows to make management a little bit more manageable, sort of assigning these unique areas to keep an eye on and address unique conditions of each of these common lake or canal areas. It also allows us to personalize management goals and strategies to each of these unique areas, and potentially also trial some newer adaptive technologies where we could consider some of the canals or portions of these management units as potentially mesocoms where we can try out some of these new technologies or try out more well-known technologies and study how effective they are in this system and include that in our adaptive management plan, that for the future. The second main component of the management plan outlines the goals and objectives for what we're trying to achieve here. So we know that we reduce blooms and risks to public health and wildlife. How exactly are we going to do that? So what we have laid out here is objectives for the entire fresh waterways as a system as a whole. And then we also have objectives per management unit. So I'll go over the objectives for the entire fresh waterways first. For the entire system, what we want to see is improved public awareness and communication with the public about algae blooms to ultimately reduce exposure to these toxins. We also want to be reducing the number of years have blooms in them, so to less than 2 for every 10-year period. And this is particularly infrequent for the number of blooms. We're seeing blooms in ocean shores right now every year. We want to reduce that to 2 years out of every 10 years. And this is based on ecology's listing criteria for HAB-impaired water bodies, so algae-impaired water bodies. And to do that, we're going to need to reduce trophic state, again, that lake health criteria, down to a lower or mid-eutrophic. Again, this is still pretty high for a system, for a freshwater waste system in Washington, but this is going to be a manageable and achievable goal based where the freshwater wastes currently are at a hyper-eutrophic level. And then also have these objectives to be considered on a per management unit basis. So again, looking at each of these management units for each Lake Menard and Fishhook and the Baskin Mid Duck Lake, what have you. So for each of those, what we're looking at is the toxin advisory duration. We want to reduce the number of days that each of these units are seeing and having a toxin advisory. We want folks to be able to use these waterways. So this is to less than 3 consecutive weeks at a time, where we'd like to see toxin advice, or even less frequently if possible. And again, this is based on ecology's listing criteria. We also need to be reducing the amount of overall summertime algae to achieve some of these goals. And again, we've laid out less than 24 parts per billion of chlorophyll A, which is a of algae. It's the pigment that allows them to grow. And again, this is quite hot based on this lower mid-eutrophic state. But again, this will be more achievable in the near term, and with adaptive management, as we begin reaching some of these goals, we can defy them in the future. Okay. The next major component that we recommended in the plan is to continue algae and water quality monitoring. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One, we just want to be warned and consistently informed about what's going on in the waterways, but we also want to be seeing if we're meeting our goals and objectives with whatever management strategies are implemented. So at the very basic, we want algae bloom surveillance during the summer times especially. Again, this will help us feel and be more informed about the algae that are in the system, the potential risks and potential opportunities for sampling toxins if necessary, if those blooms are occurring. So, basically out there every week to each of these management units to see if there's a bloom and to sample it if there is one. Pardon me. In addition to that, we also recommend regular water quality monitoring. So a program like we instituted last year in 2024, where we're out there at each of these management units testing the water quality for amount of algae through chlorophyll, where we're looking at the amounts of phosphorus and these other water quality variables like temperature and dissolved oxygen. That can give us a lot of information moving forward about the effectiveness of these management strategies and how far we are to meeting these management goals. And I also want to note that the algae bloom surveillance and sampling, there's already a wonderful program that is managed by the Washington State Department of Ecology that provides free testing for the city of Ocean Shores and other municipalities to be test some of these cyanobacteria samples. And that's something that the city of Ocean Shores is already coordinating. So wonderful job. The next major component of the plan is we recommended to increase communications with residents and visitors alike. We know that these are important populations and users of the fresh waterways of Ocean Shores. And it's really critical to help reduce risk towards the public and pets. And we recommended developing a communication plan, which can include a variety of things. But overall, what communication should consist of, in whatever form it takes, is outlining clear procedures for city testing, monitoring, and for the public to report blooms if possible. Providing consistent communications, again, to residents and visitors alike, to find information, what kinds of things to look out for with harmful algal blooms and what the risks are, and where also to find algae advisory information. And we need all of this information to be accessible. Folks should know where to go to find the most up-to-date information on toxin advisories and how to or look for algae blooms in the fresh waterways. And I want to note that the city is already taking the first steps at this. They've just recently posted a new website called Algae Awareness, What You Need to Know. So if you have any questions on algae and ocean shores, I recommend checking out that page there. So thinking that together. And finally, we're here at the largest component of the management plan is looking at how to manage phosphorus, looking at source control, and how to manage the algae in the fresh waterways. Again, this is called symptom mitigation in the waterways and in the watershed. And so this is where we're looking at using technologies and different strategies for reducing the algae and phosphorus. When we're looking at the sources that I described a little earlier, the number one source of phosphorus was groundwater. When we're thinking about to control phosphorus from groundwater, unfortunately, in this particular area, there isn't a good way to control groundwater phosphorus, unfortunately. Again, it's due to those ancient bans. We can't really get down there and dig it all up. So what we're going to need to rely on for this particular is in-water mitigation. And so I'll speak to it in a little while. The different strategies and technologies that we looked at for mitigating phosphorus in the waterways. Next, we're looking at watershed inputs. So again, this is from those streams and the creeks in the watershed. How do we control phosphorus from there? And briefly, just to continue the improvement, what we found in 2024 is that they're working. The phosphorus coming in from water and creeks is reduced based on compared to what was found in 1994. Working on completing those sewer connections. There's a few remaining septic systems in the watershed. Continuing stormwater improvements throughout the watershed, but also you all can help too as residents. We can reduce our use of fertilizers. We can make sure that we're cleaning up pet waste so all of the phosphorus doesn't end up in the waterways. We can also improve shorelines by planting native species and reducing or removing your lawns entirely. This can help reduce erosion, the sediment getting into the waterways and that muck buildup over time. And it can also help deter waterfowl, leaving all of their droppings and all of that phosphorus in your lawns and ultimately ending up in these as well. And then we're also looking towards internal cycling and release. So all of those internal sources of phosphorus, like I said, from sediment, from waterfowl, and what we're really looking at for reducing this is potentially inactivating the phosphorus that's already in the water and sediment, which I'll speak to in a moment. That is an in-water management method. We can also look towards methods that reduce how easily the toxic algae or cyanobacteria can grow relative to other types of algae. Because if we reduce the toxic species and increase the more beneficial species, then there's less likely of a chance of toxic advisories in risk. And overall, looking at these in-water management strategies to improve water quality. So what are these in-water management strategies that I've spoken so often about? Briefly, some of the top strategies that we considered, these top technologies, include mixing or circulation devices. This is a picture showing a device that floats at the top of the water and improves the circulation at the very surface. And what this does is it disrupts the cyanobacteria's advantage for floating above other types of algae and really hogging up all of that light, allowing better and more beneficial types of algae to grow in its place. We also considered oxygenation or aeration technologies. And these are systems which are placed on the bottoms of lakes to add oxygen into that very bottom layer to prevent that chemical reaction that allows phosphorus to infiltrate in from the sediment, to be released from the sediment, and can also potentially help prevent that groundwater phosphorus from coming in and released as well if it's trapped in the sediments first. We also looked at phosphorus inactivate. I've mentioned that a couple of times, and what this is, it can be comprised of a variety of different chemicals, including alum or lanthanum. But what this is a chemical treatment that effectively locks in phosphorus particles, and it can lock it in the water. It can lock it from the sediment, and it can also create somewhat of a barrier trapping that phosphorus before it can reach the water in the waterways. We also looked at algicides, and algicides are a great near-term they're very technology. They're very effective at killing specifically algae, any type of algae, but very short term. They're not great for long-term plans, as you use it over, that could get quite expensive, but they're a really great option for these defined areas and short-term control at reducing potentially some of the most thick or problematic blooms. So we considered those. We also considered dredging. I knew folks were interested in dredging as an option. And I just want to, we did this, and in addition to how expensive dredging is, I also want to remind folks that sediments are not the primary source of phosphorus in this particular system. Just as a reminder, most of that phosphorus is coming in from water. So if we're digging it up, we're making it potentially easier for that groundwater to move into the surface water. So those deeper holes, more dredging, could allow for more phosphorus input from the groundwater, and that's not really something that we want to add to. And we also considered other experimental or emerging technologies. These are things that don't have quite as consistent evidence for improving water quality, reducing harmful algal blooms, but they do show promise, or at least improvements in some systems, and so they're worth trying, especially if the price is right. So looking at things like sonication or ozone, with or without micro or nanobubbles, straw, or even some dyes. So this is a lot of methods. We looked at all of them. We costed many of them out. So which ones should we choose and where should we be? And there's a lot of water out there. What needs to be done and where? To help answer this question and to provide some, sort of selection for you all and for the city, we outlined 3 level of service scenarios. And this term level of service will be important for the upcoming presentation by FCS as well. So from here on, this is a great thing to obtain level of service. And what I mean by level of service is the level of benefit, or the level of management, essentially, that we are recommending under each of the scenarios. And so at the first scenario, we have the lowest level of service or lowest level of benefit with the lowest level of management implemented. And this comes lowest cost as well. So that's the benefit of reduced management, is lower cost. And then we have a second level of service where it adds a bit more management options at a higher cost, right? And then we have the third level of service scenario. And this is the one where there's the most level of service, the most management going on, but this is all at the highest cost. And I'm going to move through those, through each of those with you shortly. So on the left-hand side here, hopefully you can all see that in person. Let's see. Can I get a quick confirmation that I'll see my updated slide? I'm not sure that my screen is showing the updated slide. It looks like you're still on the considered
Katie, we see a
slide.
menu on the left and then the blue.
You should be seeing an arrow of sorts and the beginning of a table left.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, Becky, is that what you're seeing? Okay. Well, it's, I think, difficult to hear you from the room, but I've gotten confirmation that you can see the slide, the correct slide. So I'm going to keep on trucking unless I hear otherwise. Feel free to chime in if anything looks or sounds weird. So yes, here we are on the left-hand side with this table here. These are each of the main components of the Fresh Waterways management plan that we just talked about. So we're including here, again, communications, monitoring any watershed management, so looking at controlling the sources of phosphorus in the watershed. And then I have outlined here in water management options for each of these 9 management units. I have added them. So for the first level of service option, we're focusing here on including the basic monitoring strategy of bloom surveillance, so making sure that we're getting out to each of those management units to look for algae blooms and sampling them if possible. And we're also including some enhanced circulation technology in 3 out of the 9 management units to break up the amount of cyanobacteria floating on the surface, help that the other types of beneficial algae grow instead. This comes at an annual cost of $41,000. A quick note about the costs down at the bottom. These are summarized as annual average costs. The costs will vary from year to year depending on the management implemented and the level of service. And much more information on costs are available within the plan itself. But just as a quick and easy way of comparing overall costs between these level of service scenarios, we've averaged them out over 20 years and included that average cost here at the bottom. So for the lowest level of service, we're looking at $41,000 per year for this. The moderate level of service scenario, so number 2, improves on level 1. We're also adding, you'll see here, a communications plan. And we're also adding some trophic state monitoring. So getting at some more of those, the water quality monitoring that we performed in 24 in addition to bloom surveillance. So we're adding that in. And then we're also adding management for all 9 of the management units. And here, instead of enhanced circulation for canals in the Bass Canal, we're instead adding alum. And that's true for most of the managements. And again, alum is one of those chemicals that are that inactivate or trap the phosphorus in the system, not allowing it to be used by algae. True for all but Fishhook Canal, where we are keeping the enhanced circulation device, but also adding some treatments to really cut back on the severe blooms that are seen in that particular canal. Excuse me. And all of this coming at about $350,000 on per year. And the final and third high level of service scenario, it actually includes everything in the moderate level of service scenario, adds a few more items. So in this level of service scenario, this is adding 3 emit projects in the watershed. We're assuming a mix of stormwater improvement and sewer connection improvement projects. And in addition, for the Lake Menard Management Unit, instead of annual alum treatments to lock in the sediment, we're instead recommending a oxygenation system be installed at the bottom of Lake Menard with occasional iron supplements. And what this does, just as a reminder, it helps prevent that chemical reaction from occurring that allows phosphorus from the sediment, potentially coming in from groundwater, from reaching the water above. It keeps it locked into the sediments effectively onto those iron particles instead of being allowed into the water and for use by cyanobacteria algae. So with all of those, that'll come out to an average annual cost of $570,000 per year. And this is not really inclusive of other potential pilot projects, as I mentioned before. The structure of each of the management units can potentially allow some of these areas to be mesocosms to, again, test the effectiveness of some proven technologies, or even to test how well some experimental or some of those emerging technologies can perform. And something like this could include nanobubbles for use in some of the finger canals in the Grand Canal, or it could include a short-term alum study in Fishhook Canal, for example, see how long some of these strategies are lasting. And then we can adapt upon that. So just to wrap up all of this information, This was an overview of the Freshwaterways Management Plan that's currently published online. I urge you to go ahead and read through that if you'd like. Overall, the plan includes some background information that I really didn't get into today, including the history and water quality in the area, previous studies. It again over the goals and objectives for improving harmful algae and water quality in the freshwaters. And it really goes through a lot more detail on these recommended management actions and the time for potential implementation of these management strategies. It also provides an adaptive management framework for how we can learn and improve on these management strategies going forward to better meet the management goals. Next up, we'll hear from John with the utility rate study. But before we do, I want to take a few minutes to, take any questions that you all have on the plan. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, we'll take questions from the audience. Anybody have a question?
And it is a little hard to hear you, so I apologize.
I was a little surprised when I saw in there that you said our water quality is better than it was in 1994. And I lived here in 1994, at least I had property here. And I can tell you that in 1994, I could still see the bottom. I haven't been able to do that in a number of years now. And today, I don't think I can see more than an inch or two deep. We used the water. People were out in it in 94. I didn't personally swim in it, but I went in a number of times accidentally. And I wasn't concerned that I was going to catch something from doing that. I wouldn't go in it today. So I'm wondering what measure it was in 94 that you say the water is better today.
Yes, thank you much for that. And yeah, I'm glad you made it out to that tonight as well to listen about the plan. It's really interesting to hear your stories from 1994. And I guess I'd like to clarify that the improvements to water quality between then were focused on that I mentioned are the sources from phosphorus coming in from the watershed. So the stormwater and the inputs from, say, septic systems and other types of runoff, the streams, the water quality coming into the freshwaterways is substantially better than it was in 1994 in terms of the amount of phosphorus. We didn't necessarily evaluate other types of pollutants coming in. So I do want to note that when I'm talking about better water quality, I'm primarily talking about the nutrients coming into the freshwaterways. And I'll also note that the water quality within the freshwaterways, in the lakes and canals, it does vary over time. And we did see a change from most of the waterways in 1994 seemed to be eutrophic, which is a little bit lower at health scale compared to today's mostly hyper-eutrophic water quality within the waterways. So the water quality has become more productive. There's more algae. It's a little bit warmer. And perhaps that's what you're noticing is lower water clarity, higher nutrients in the waterways themselves, more algae. So I do want to reflect that your observation is correct. But it does vary over years and depends and varies between the canals too, because as I said, back in 1994, Bass Canal was actually one of the worst water quality canals, whereas the water quality in Bass Canal was more improved compared to some of the other lakes and canals in the system. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on each year to see what changes there are in quality. over time and between the canals. What could be influencing worse qualities in which areas? So thank you so much. And just to be clear, while the water quality has improved over time, it's still in pretty shape. There's still quite a bit of phosphorus coming in, even from the sewer and septic systems. So there has been some substantial improvements. So again, great. We love to see that forward momentum, but there's definitely still more work to be done.
Hi, David Lynn here. I think you partially answered the question I was going to ask about other pollutants and how much you tested for that, and how what's the effect of runoff from impervious surfaces into the culverts and then into the canals and into the lakes, and what kind of interaction there might be between those chemicals or the runoff and with the bacteria.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a wonderful question. So we did look at bacteria as one of the water quality parameters coming in from streams and stormwater. There with a limited data set, it's difficult to look at trends over time. But there is higher bacteria coming in from, I believe it was Oyahut Creek. I'd have to go back and look at the plan at this point. But that was one of the places where we saw higher bacteria. Looking at an overall impact of impervious surfaces in the watershed would be analysis for future study. And we'd love to be able to help out something like that in the future if it's warranted, and then however it fits into the city's stormwater management plans and opportunities moving into the future. But that's certainly something that can be studied. Mm-hmm.
In both the book and in your talk this evening, you talked about algicide was a short-term fix. Please define short-term. Is it days, weeks, months?
I love that question. Thank you for bringing that up. It depends on where you're applying the algicide. Typically, algicide works in the form of days to potentially weeks. For ocean shores, I would expect it would work again depending on which management unit and the dosage and whatnot. I would expect it to work on a time scale of days, which is really helpful for managing risks in, again, smaller areas and in advance of potentially some really important recreational events or potentially just reducing overall algae in an area where it's particularly impactful, such as swimming beaches. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have a question here? How about from the Fresh Waterways Board? No?
Katie, for the algicide question, I have a couple of questions for it. Do you need an applicator's license for an algicide?
Yes, you do. That's correct.
Okay.
And you'll
And
need a
then
permit.
You said how long it would take to take effect. How long would it last? How long could we expect for it to last before potentially the same area would need another treatment?
Yeah, so the algicide actually works immediately. You can see results within 20 minutes. You can see that algae dying back. But in terms of how long it lasts, it depends again on the flow and water quality already there, of course. But I would expect it to last days to potentially weeks before treatment is needed again. And so where it's included in the plan is to really help promote the growth of other types of algae species instead of cyanobacteria, and reduce the overall scums that we're seeing in those really impacted areas where there's just a high amount of growth of algae. And in the plan, we talk about recurring algicide treatments for the case that we're using them. So they can be effective in limited areas over time. And of course, this is all something that can be adapted over time. If it's not something that we think is, cost effective moving forward, we can always look to other types of management strategies.
Anybody else before we move on to the next part? You got a follow up here? Okay.
With the algicide, does that have any side effects? Does it have any other negative impacts on the water system, or is it just simply narrowly targeted at the algae?
Thank you. It is targeted at the algae. So it's a peroxide-based chemical. So the peroxide breaks up into harmless chemicals after it's applied, and it specifically targets algae. So cyanobacteria and other types of algae as well. There are no other impacts. Thank you.
Yeah, hello, Katie. A quick question. In the third scenario, the alum was the primary effector. What is the relative effectiveness between the alum and the algicide?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. So alum treatments are focused on controlling phosphorus as the source of algae growth, right? So algae need phosphorus in order to grow. The effectiveness of alum is much longer than algicides. Alum in a system can last multiple years. Best case scenarios can last 10 to 20 years. For ocean shores with the high amount of phosphorus in the system, we would likely need recurring alum treatments to help knock back the total amount of alum in the system to make it to a level where algae growth is effectively controlled. So we would expect the effectiveness of alum, well, one, to be much longer than algicide, but much shorter potentially than other systems in Washington State, again, because of the high amount of phosphorus in the system. So between 1 to maybe 2 years each. But this is something that we, could recommend studying in one or multiple of these pilot programs in some of these management units. Yeah, and I think these are all really wonderful questions. I realize I have taken up a lot of time speaking about the management plan, which is great. And I also want to make sure that we're leaving some time for John to present the utility rate study. So I'll take it from you. I can't quite see the crowd as you can, but if there are any last remaining questions, I think I can take one more.
We got one more, if that's okay.
Sure. Thank you.
All right.
I think I know the answer, but I'd like confirmed. My understanding with the alum is that as it settled to the bottom, it would effectively put a cap on all of that stuff at the bottom, all of the old vegetation rotting. And so it would prevent both percolation from the peat bog underneath, and it would prevent percolation from the rotting vegetation mat. So effectively put a tile cap on top of the vegetation at the bottom. Is that a correct perception?
Hi, yeah. So the alum does form a flocculant, is what we call it, that settles on the bottom of the waterways. And effectively, what it's doing is it's locking in the phosphorus that it comes into contact with from the waterways, and it can settle on the bottom. It is not a true cap. It can be disturbed through turbation, like say from carp or props, for example. So it's not a true cap in that sense, but it can help a little bit with controlling the phosphorus coming in from the sediments and from groundwater. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Thank you all so much for some, really smart and important questions.
Thank you, Katie. We're ready to move on with FCS. Thank you for your presentation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Katie. Good evening, everybody. I'm John Gillarducci with FCS. We've been working in partnership with Herrera and also with city staff to develop a financial plan that will allow these recommendations to be executed. And I'll share my screen here. So the way that we have laid out our presentation tonight, we'll be focusing a lot on what we call the revenue requirement, and what the revenue requirement is really just a financial plan. It's a series of rate adjustments that will generate the amount of revenue that's needed to meet all of the stormwater utility, which is the utility that will fund this plan, that will meet all the obligations of the stormwater utility going forward. Those are operating costs, capital costs. There are some construction items, and then there are some sort of policy-driven obligations as well. And so you'll see a multi-year financial plan with proposed rate increases over that period that will meet all of those obligations. And the way that we've laid out the presentation tonight, we'll talk a little bit about how we do this, what the methodology is. Excuse me. And we'll talk about what some of our key assumptions are that are built into our numbers. We have some rate survey information, so we can show you what stormwater rates are around the region to give you an idea of where the city of Ocean Shores fits in and would fit in. And then we'll get right into the revenue requirement forecast for each of the levels of service that Katie described previously. So we'll be able to look at the rate impacts of each of those. So an overview of the rate study looks like this. On the left side are some of the policy questions that we talked through with city staff, and you'll see those built into the actual analysis. There are fiscal policies, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute, that we've built in. Those really have to do with minimum fund balances. There's a capital funding strategy that we have built in that makes assumptions about how the capital projects will be paid for by a mix of rates and, in some cases, grants. And then we have the levels of service described and defined by Katie and Herrera, and then much discussion about how to incorporate those levels of service into our analytical work. On the right side, you see the main inputs, those being reserves, operations and maintenance. Those are O&M costs, capital costs. And then if there were sometimes for expensive capital projects, it makes sense to issue debt. And the city stormwater utility doesn't have any debt right now, so we didn't have to worry about modeling current debt. But all of those are inputs into that revenue requirement that tells us how much money we're going to need from rates to meet all the obligations of the stormwater utility. So once again, just shown a different way, our goal is to determine how much revenue is needed each year for this to build this financial plan. And the main inputs are fiscal policy impacts. What do we need for reserves, forecasted operating and maintenance costs, rate funded capital, construction, and then debt service if there is to be any debt service. So I mentioned fiscal policies. The two main fiscal policies that you'll see built into the financial plans or revenue requirement analyses for each level of service is the operating reserve or the rainy day reserve, as it's called here. This is just working capital, keeping enough money in the bank so that the utility is not at risk if there was an unexpected operating expense or revenues came in low for some reason. So that target is 10% of budgeted appropriations. So that's about $140,000 in the current year. That doesn't mean that we're going to raise rates to generate $140,000. We just know if we dip below that by the end of the year, then the next year we want to replenish that amount. You'll see in a minute that the city is in a very good cash position. So there are no rate adjustments needed to meet these fiscal policies. They're just smart practices going forward. The second one is what we're calling a capital reserve, and we're assuming or building in a $250,000 minimum capital fund balance at the end of every year. That's to handle, as we say, their smaller emergency projects as opposed to operating changes over time. So those fiscal policies are built in. Just as for those of you who don't know, you're currently paying a stormwater rate. It's in that highlighted portion of the box there, much less than a penny per square foot per month. And for typical single family residential customers, that falls between $5 and $15 per month for stormwater service. The amount is imposed on the square footage of the lot. So so it's that much less than a penny a month, and between $5 and $15 per month for stormwater, depending on the size of the lot. I mentioned that the utility is in a good cash position, and this is a look back at revenues and expenditures since 2021. This dotted line, the dashed line, I should say, is revenue each year. And in the stacked bars beneath, you see a breakdown of expenses from year to year, salaries, intergovernmental services, transfers out, supplies, services and pass-throughs. These bounce around a little bit from year to year. One thing to know that's very important, the last rate increase was in 2022. So there was a pretty significant increase in 2022, but the rate has not changed since then. The other reason, one of the things you might notice right off the bat is revenues are in excess of expenses. One of the issues that we're trying to plan for, and has been a very important factor in the good cash position of the stormwater utility, is the general fund has been making a transfer into the stormwater fund of over $500,000, about $570,000 is what it would have been in fiscal year 2025. That general fund transfer is going to stop. So those total revenues, you see them at about 1.5 million in fiscal year 2024. Those are going to go down by almost $600,000 beginning in the current year, fiscal year 2025. So this is the strong cash position I was talking about. If you look at the ending fund balance in each of the last 4 years, the city stormwater fund ended fiscal year 2024 with about 1.34 million in the bank, and the beginning balance in 2025 over $2 million. We're going to very carefully use some of that cash balance to manage the rate increases going forward, spend it smartly on capital projects, and to try and smooth out any potential rate increases. So very positive thing that the city is in this good cash position, because it gives us some options going forward. This is a stormwater rate survey, just to sort of set the stage for some of the numbers that you'll see in a minute. We had to look in Eastern Washington to find any rates that were as low as the city's current rate. This $5.40 is the monthly rate for an 8,000 square foot lot in the city of Ocean Shores. A much bigger lot, 18,000 square feet, would be about a little over $12 per month. And as you see, around the region, stormwater rates are almost across the board in excess of that amount, and we see routinely over $10, $20, and now even $30 a month in some locations. I should point out as well that all these systems are different and all the needs are different. So it's kind of apples and oranges to even do this type of comparison, but I know it's usually very interesting to people to know what people are paying around the area. So I mentioned some of the key assumptions that we build in. We try to as best we can use historical information to project cost inflation, and we build that into our escalation of operating costs. We have a construction cost inflator built into the capital projects so that years out when the city's building capital projects, we hope we're close to what those real costs will be. Labor and benefits, we inflate at 3% for labor, 5% a year for benefits. Money in the bank, we assume that it will generate some interest, and we build that in on the revenue side. So we try to take into account these different factors that can change costs over time. This is a glimpse of the expense breakdown from the 2025 budget. So as you saw before, in 2024, there were revenues of a little over 1.5 million that included that general fund transfer. In 2025, there will be no general fund transfer, so revenues will go down to around $1 million. Expenses will be, unfortunately, about 1.5 million. And as you see, broken down like this, large expenses, professional services, those are contracted services in some cases, supplies, salaries and benefits. And this is before the addition of the level of service recommendations that have come out of the plan. One thing about that supplies line item, there's a small tools and equipment item of 440,000 that will actually occur in 25 and 26, but drop down almost go away in 2027. So that number for supplies is going to get a lot smaller in 2027 and beyond. So Katie described the different levels of service. Just as a quick refresher, they're a mix of operating and some capital costs. The low level of service, moderate level of service, and then high, which includes everything in moderate, with the one exception of alum treatment in Menard and the addition of a couple of other projects or programs, oxygenation system in Menard and retrofits for phosphorus removal. So these, of course, come with different costs, and those feed right into the rate scenarios that we'll show you in a minute. This is a summary of the capital plans for each level of service. So if you look at the blue bars here in 26, 27, and 28, these represent the level of service 1 capital projects, and they total, as you see here, about $200,000. We are assuming that 100,000 of those will be grant funded. So the impact on rates from year to year, a little over 100,000. Level of service 2, which includes more programmatic or operating costs and less capital, you see is that orange, or the orange bars in 26, 27, lower capital expenditures of 87,000, which we're assuming be erased by grants, so the effect on the revenue requirement or financial plan will be 0. As you see, many more capital projects planned because it's a more ambitious level of service. For level of service 3, totaling a little over $2.4 million. We are, however, assuming that the city won't proceed with all these projects unless they're able to get grant funding to the tune of almost $1.8 million. So the impact on the stormwater utility and the financial plan, $630,000 in total. So now moving into the results. the revenue requirement for level of service 1, or again, the financial plan for level of service 1, which was described as the lower effort of the three. Let me explain what we're looking at here. So 2025 and 2026, you see higher O&M numbers than you do in 2027 and beyond. That's because in 2026, that small tools and equipment line item, which was $440,000, drops down to $4,000 in 2027 and beyond. So there's a drop in the expenses. At the same time, you see revenue at existing rates, which is the solid black line here, starting out at about 1.2 million. That's because the general fund transfer ceases in 2025, and there's an immediate deficiency between revenue and expenses. That continues in 2026. And in order to right the ship, I guess you could say, and align rate revenue with expenses for this level of service, a series of 3.5% rate increases are needed in order to meet all the financial obligations of the utility and those items that were described in level of service 1. The reason that the city can endure these deficiencies in 2025 and 2026 is because of that outstanding cash position that the city is in. We're carefully spending that down in the first 2 years and then increasing revenues with rates. So this shows what the ending fund balances would be projected for each year. They dip in 25 and 26 and then slowly build up over time, because after the capital money has been spent at the front end here, the city's able to maintain a healthy fund balance going forward. This dashed line you see here is the minimum fund balance required to meet the fiscal policy targets that I described earlier. This level of service 2, described as moderate effort, you see additional O&M. These were the programmatic activities that Katie described, increasing costs in 2026, but the city's again largely able to cover those additional costs with existing fund balance. And then over time, rate increases of 8% per year allow the city to get back ahead of expenses with rate revenues and then begin to fund capital with some rate contribution. Up until that point, we're using fund balance and rate increases to generate enough money for capital. But this plan, and by 2033, able to get back down to more like inflationary increases at 3.5% per year. And I know these percentages look large. I'll show you in a couple slides what they are in terms of dollars. Because the initial rate is so low, the dollar impacts are nowhere near as alarming as the percentage increases. So this shows ending fund balances throughout the period here. Because this one's a little bit more aggressive, we're spending fund balance down, but we're still staying well above that recommended minimum fund balance target, and there should be around $1 million in the bank at the end of 2034. So for level of service 3, described as high effort, this one includes all of the moderate level of service plus some additional programs and projects. There are additional operating costs up front. As you can see in this yellow slice, we're beginning to fund more capital with rate money, including the fund balance. This takes 3 years of 14.5% increases to kind of climb the hill, and then back to inflationary 3.5s for the rest of the planning period. And again, a little under $1 million in ending fund balance at the end of 2034 after all that work's been done. So to give you an idea, I mentioned the percentage increases and what they look like in dollars. So the way to read this is in the top three rows of this table, you have the percentage increases, and those are the same increases you saw in the preceding slides for each level of service. And then what the resulting monthly rate per square foot of lot size would be, how that would go up from year to year by those percentage increases, and then what that means to an average single family bill for an 8,000 square foot lot. So beginning with the $5.40 monthly bill, you can see in all three of these, the rate is still less than $10 by the end of 2034. Percentages on these comparatively low rates, the rate stays at least comparatively reasonable over the period, and the city's able to get done whatever level of service is chosen by the end of 2034 and still have a fairly manageable rate. So yeah, wanted to make that point. In summary, we've got the different rate increases or rate plans by level of service. For level of service 1, that was 3.5% per year. Level of service 2 was 8% per year through 2032, and then 3.5% after that. Level of service 3, 14.5% per year for 3 years, and then 3.5% every year after that. The additional O&M and capital needs of levels of service 2 and 3, we will spend fund balance to manage those very carefully and then generate positive cash flow as the rates catch up with the expenses. And we've tried to keep the rates as low as possible by managing it that way. And then as you noticed in the comparables chart, the city's current rate for a single family residence or a single family residential lot is low compared to its peers around the region. And as we just saw, even those higher percentage increases will have a lower dollar impact than you might expect because of that. So that's it for our prepared material. We're ready for questions.
Right, thanks. Yeah, we got a question here.
Thank you. Were those rates based on the expectation of getting the grants?
Yes.
What is the confidence level in getting grants?
Well, so, and that's a great question because, as you know, most of those grants are competitive. So the way that, and this was based on extensive conversations with staff and with Herrera, I think the city's expectation is if they don't get the grants, they won't build the project. So that's why we felt comfortable projecting that the grants would come in, because the understanding was if you don't get the grants, then the city wouldn't be faced with generating the entire cost of those projects. And we think that, and I probably shouldn't even say this, but as competitive as these grants are, we think that ultimately there's a pretty good likelihood the city will be able to get some of that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you said that in your plan was ground in the fact that a general fund transfer into this utility fund is going to stop in 2025 or 2026. What is the basis for that? Why is that? Is that an assumption you're making, or is that just is it going to happen, and why? Why wouldn't it continue if it is doing it now?
I think staff can probably speak to that better than I can, but to my understanding, the transfer has already stopped. That was a policy decision, so that subsidy is no longer occurring.
I don't think it was necessarily a policy decision. I think that it was a transfer that was supposed to happen maybe for a bunch of years in the past and was supposed to stop, and it was never stopped. And we found it, the finance department found it based on a cost allocation report that we received this year that showed that the allocation was based on depreciation of equipment and buildings, and it was put into an account for small tools and equipment. And it wasn't supposed to be that way. So we're correcting an error.
For what it's worth, and small comfort maybe, but almost all of the utilities you saw, for example, in that comparables chart and around the region, treat their stormwater utilities as an enterprise fund, a basically a business operating within the general government, and they don't receive subsidies like that. So that's worked very much to the benefit of the stormwater utility, and put it in a pretty good cash position, even if it wasn't done on purpose. But yeah, it's more common to have these utilities stand on their own, sort of on their own 2 feet, like we are planning going forward.
How long do these grants last? Are they reapplied for every year, or is there longevity to each one?
Well, the programs, and Katie might be able to expand on this, but the programs offered through the state of Washington, you apply for them on an annual basis, and you would generally get a grant to cover the cost of a project. And then there'll be some strings attached to how you're able to use the grant money, but you can use it over the course of a few years to get the project built. If you have a project, many years later, you could apply for a grant at that time for that project. So they're fairly regular, annual application process and awards, unless the grants go away. They rise and fall sometimes in the amount of funding that's offered, but yeah, they're generally there to be applied for on an annual or periodic basis.
You got your hand up,
Time.
Richard? Okay.
I was going to chime in just real quick and say that was a great overview.
So,
There's a variety of
as I read the
grants.
report, what I remember is that the alum treatment, which I perceive to be the most effective phosphorus treatment that we could use, the alum treatment for 20 years, I think, for 10 years was $20 million. And the level 3 service, this is my question, the level 3 service at this, I'm looking at less than $10 for an 8,000 square foot house. Will that cover that alum treatment over the course of this plan?
I believe that it will. Yeah, I mean, to the extent that those costs have been included in that level of service, this rate plan covers all those costs with offsetting grants assumed for some of the capital. So the short answer is yes.
All right. Couple more questions, looks like.
As a member of the Finance Committee, I just wanted to add to what Becky said in terms of the cost allocation. The cost allocation study is online with the Finance Committee, and we are trying to correct some of the accounting issues that had occurred in the past. So that's why there is no longer that transfer into the fund.
And I also, I just texted Sarah because I know she's listening at home, and she said it's not 100% not being transferred, it's being corrected to the right amount. And I don't know what that is right now, but Finance Committee meeting, next meeting.
Yeah, I guess that surprises me because we do refer to the stormwater budget as a utility. And if it's a utility, all of that money that's been transferred in is subject to audit reimbursement. We've been there before. When our cost allocation table was all screwed up, we had the funds, the enterprise funds, ended up suffering from that. So I'm glad to hear it's being looked at and corrected. I wonder how much damage it will do. And that brought me around to the storm drain utility is more than just our fresh waterways. And as we build out and as we have more concrete, and that's happening rapidly, we may be faced with having to treat some of our stormwater. And I recall not too many years ago, we were in danger of that in the downtown area. So because we have to reach a certain level at outfall. And I am wondering, have we included any of that future view of what our storm drain will look like?
In the work that we did, our focus was on the existing utility program and the fresh waterways management plan recommendations. So we didn't look beyond that.
The Fresh Waterways Management Plan also assumes a few of those stormwater treatment or prevention projects as well. Projects to be determined, but
Katie, can you say that again a little bit louder?
yeah, of course. Is this volume okay?
Yeah, louder is better.
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted to mention that the Fresh Waterways Plan, that highest level of service, the LOS 3, does assume some stormwater improvement projects that you're speaking to. So those that would aim to treat stormwater coming out of outfalls or prevent stormwater from reaching the waterways. So it does account for some future improvement. But those projects are to be determined with the city and, of course, additional stormwater monitoring and planning as needed. But it accounts for some of those future projects.
And we are, in our grant discussions with the Fresh Waterways, we are also having discussions about what grants are available for other stormwater infrastructure and infrastructure for the city in general. So those discussions are happening.
I have one more question, and it might be for Becky. Who is actually conducting the work that will be involved?
It depends on which work we do. Some of the work we may be able to do with city staff. I think most of the work will be done by contractors, and we would put out for statement of qualifications or requests for proposals, just depending on the size of the project and what we choose to do.
Okay, thank you.
Got any other questions? Right here? Okay.
You say this is all the fresh water. Would it help if the city was not dumping the storm into the waterways?
Yeah, I can try to tackle that. So stormwater treatment, there's a variety of mechanisms depending on where the stormwater is and what kind it is. We can look to be treating or preventing that stormwater, but all water runs downhill. If you look at a variety of other municipalities around the state, it all ends up downstream in one stream or another. So looking at ways that we can prevent how pollutants end up in the stormwater is the best way to manage stormwater. Just prevent it from getting there entirely, which is great. The alternative is to then be treating the stormwater if preventing pollutants from getting there in the first place isn't possible. So these are things that I'm sure the city will be thinking about and discussing, moving forward. We have some insights as well working with other municipalities. So, would love to be involved in those conversations moving forward. But yeah, there's a variety of mechanisms that the city can continue considering for the prevention of pollutants in stormwater. Yeah.
Katie, can you just really quickly say what our most common stormwater is that's going into our lakes and canals?
The most common stormwater?
Like where it's coming from?
Well, it's runoff from the entire watershed. I'll say briefly. Whatever is coming off of the driveways, roofs, parking lots, it's ending up in a ditch somewhere, which flows into another ditch and eventually into the waterways at some point. So there's a variety of pathways, I would say, throughout the watershed. From the monitoring locations that we chose in 2024, which were semi-strategic, we found the highest phosphorus coming in from, I'd say, the west side of the canals, like the Pacific Ocean side of Ocean Shores. I believe in the Pacific Boulevard drain was one of them. But other pollutants include, bacteria loading. Those are things that are important for the city and residents to keep an eye on. I recall a fair amount of bacteria, such as E. coli coming in. I again believe this was from the Oyahut Creek drainage that empties into the Grand Canal, excuse me. So these are definitely areas to keep an eye on in the future and great places for potential stormwater improvement or retrofit projects.
We have any other questions?
I think this is actually a Becky question, should I hold until they're done?
Anybody have any other questions concerning this presentation? Okay, I guess we will wrap it up. I appreciate everything you guys presented today. I want to thank you for that, and thank everybody for coming in.
Thank you.
For sure.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you all so much for hosting us again this evening. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
This has been a live presentation of North Beach TV. We now return you to our regular programming. Already in progress.